Welcome to the Enchanted Earth podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. Welcome. Today I have with me Nina Simons, and let me tell you a little bit about Nina. She is co-founder and chief relationship officer at Bioneers and heads its Everywoman's leadership program. Throughout her career spanning the nonprofit, social, entrepreneurship, corporate, and philanthropic centers, Nina has worked with nearly 1,000 diverse women leaders across disciplines, race, class, age, and orientation to create conditions for mutual learning, trust, and leadership development. She co-edited Moonrise, The Power of Women Leading from the Heart, and authored Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, A Woman Listens for Leadership, right here, which includes a discussion guide and embodied practices. The book won Gold Nautilus Awards in Women, Intersectionality, and Social Justice. So thank you, Nina, for coming here today.
I'm so glad to be with you, Maureen. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have to say I'm a big fan, and I know we had a chat a couple of years ago, and your story is in my book, The Enchanted Earth. And I just want to say that your energy is just so inspiring. I know that you are, working with really big issues in your leadership, especially for women and indigenous cultures and underserved groups. So I just want to say that I am so inspired by your joy and enthusiasm for life.
Well, thank you. I feel incredibly fortunate, Maureen, to have had the best lifelong education I could ever imagine through Bioneers, and also to have really set out on a quest when I was about 40 to understand what my soul brought me here to become. And I feel like over the last 27 years, I've really grown into it. And there is so much joy and sense of liberation in that I want it for everyone.
Well, there's something about that 40 years old, isn't there? Because that is right around when I also turned away from my career in marketing in New York City and felt like it was, I went from feeling very satisfied and fulfilled with my work to suddenly feeling like my soul was getting sucked out of my body. And I didn't know what I was going to do. But that time of our lives is so critical. You must see that with women in your retreats and conferences, huh?
Well, I do. And honestly, Maureen, I feel like all of us, probably almost everyone alive on the planet today, has to be going through some level of soul searching around, what's my next assignment or what's calling me now? Life is just so tenuous and there's so much at stake in every domain of human life and non-human life. And it feels like a time for a deep introspection into what's next for all of us.
So true. And I also agree that it is a process of discovery, right? Over the years, I know personally, and then from what you've written too in this book, that, it was kind of like, okay, what do I need to do now? Show me now what's next, it's never, I guess it's exciting. It's exciting for me because I love change. I love to learn and be open and to see where I'm being guided, especially by, kind of the natural world. And yeah, there's just so much excitement with that.
Well, I agree. And I think because we're all products of a culture that has some implicit biases inherent in it, we tend to think like, I'm going to find what my path is and then I'll be done and then I'll do that until I retire. And I don't experience it that way at all. I do experience my life path unfolding much more like new branches on a tree, you know? And every time I turn around, there's a new branch that wants to be born. And that's really good and really enlivening. And I hope it's true till the day I leave this earth.
I know it was really interesting when I was searching around my 40th year and I discovered feng shui. And even at that point, I said, I think this is just part of the journey. And then other things would come up and I'd be like, oh, let me go down here. Oh, let me go down here. And none of it is lost, right? It's all part of learning about myself.
Well, and it takes a long time, in my experience anyway. Maybe it's because I'm a Capricorn, but I think in most of us, it takes a long time to get a really clearish sense of what your gifts are and what's really calling you. And, you know, there's so much unlearning we all have to do from this crazy society we were born into. And so it's as much a matter of stripping away falsehoods, for me anyway, as discovering what my next clear step is. Well, and the earth is calling us so loud right now that on some level, if we're not listening, then that's what your work is about, is to help turn people on to the joy of listening for what the earth is calling for these days.
Yes, that is definitely a calling for me. And I just wanted to share this one little piece from your book, Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, that really stuck out to me the other day. If I can read it, let's see here. The crone wants to shake us all awake, screeching, "Don't you get it? This is no time for small talk. This is a time for myth making. This is a time for epic poetry. This is a time to tell the tales that will become our compass for the days ahead."
Mm.
Wow. Yes.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite pieces of writing too.
Mm. Yes. So these myths, these tales, in the journey, you were sharing with me in the book about kind of an initiation and kind of a major turning for you.
Sure. And actually, there have been several, Maureen. And in a way, I feel kind of inclined to tell the more recent ones, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, I would love that.
Good, because everyone can read about the earlier ones in the book if they want. Part of what happened for me during the pandemic, actually, I think it was just prior to the pandemic, was we had a huge wildfire here in northern New Mexico where I live. And this is high desert country. It's mountainous, it's beautiful, it's very arid. And we've been in a 100-year drought. And we had the biggest wildfire in New Mexico's history. And it was not all that far from our home. And our home sits at the edge of a national forest. So we're very lucky to get to live here, and fire danger is an omnipresent threat. And so this fire was raging out of control. It was, burning hundreds and hundreds of acres. And it was actually only about 7 miles from where we live as the crow flies. And the smoke was so bad that my animal body was just tensed to flee all the time. And we had to close all of our windows and have air purifiers going on in our home. And I turned to a friend, actually, who I knew had deep learning from Peruvian teachers and who had protected her own home from wildfire in Northern California just a year or two before. And I said, is there anything you can teach me that could help me to protect our home? And she said, yes, I'll teach you what I did. And she said, find a tree that's near to your home, that's dear to your heart, and begin creating an altar around its base. And she said, you can create the altar with many things. You can use flower petals, you can use shells, you can use any way that you choose to adorn it. But also, what you need to do is start a regular ritual of pouring libations for it and taking water and circumnavigating the trunk and occasionally using wine. And she said, and while you do that, you need to send prayers into the roots of the tree and into its branches and to the star people above, and send the prayers also to the nearest mountaintop. And in your prayers, you want to ask for forgiveness. You want to tell it that you love it. You want to thank it for being your guardian and ask it to help create protection around you. And I did all that, and I have no idea what correlated for sure or not, but eventually the fire went out. And I have continued to do that ritual with that tree ever since. Every time I go to the ocean, I bring back shells to adorn it and go around its base. And what I've found from doing that over and over and over again for now probably 3 years or so is that my connection to the land has changed. You know, I've always loved this land and I've always felt held and healed by this land. But there's a more enlivened, dynamic relationship between my being and its being now that includes the tree. It includes the mycelium under the soil. It includes the roots and the mountaintop. And it's just been making this place come more and more alive for me in relationship. And the other one that I would share is that at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was guided to listen for a species mentor. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. I wonder who that might be, you know? And as I walked, I have the gift of being able to walk on the land and in the forest with my dogs every day. And I listened for who was going to be my mentor. And what wound up happening was I really felt drawn to be mentored by this plant that's a very unique plant to this region. And it's called Apache plume. And it's the only plant around where we live that, in spite of the 100-year drought, has been consistently growing in its reach. And its fertility is profound, right? And I actually studied that plant for the full cycle of a year. And you'll see if you look it up, it has gorgeous blooms that look kind of like Cyndi Lauper's hair when it's in full bloom. And it's wonderful because they're these furry pink balls. And I'm seeing how having those furry pink seed balls must have something to do with why it's proliferating so beautifully over the land, because the wind blows and they go all over the place, right? And in the winter, when the blooms are off of it, it looks kind of spiky. So, you know, birds don't land on it. And it seems to have protective defenses that enable it to just keep proliferating and being healthy and growing. And it's just a marvelous, weird plant that's completely endemic to this region. And I feel like the combination of its beauty and its defensiveness and boundaries and its capacity for fertility and to perpetuate life no matter what have just been profound teachings for me.
I love that. And of course, you know, some people might be listening to this and saying, well, how did you know, first of all, that you were supposed to get a totem
A
helper,
species mentor. Yes.
species mentor? Like, can you just explain how you were told that?
Oh, sure. I mean, I get guidance from a lot of different directions. And sometimes I get it in a dream. Sometimes it's just intuition. And sometimes I consult people who I consider are clear channels for wisdom.
Mhm.
And I have one such person in my life who actually goes into a trance and channels some consortium of disembodied beings. And when I first went to see them or her, I was totally skeptical, you know, but I sat there and I watched her go into a trance and I heard what they had to say to me. And it all just resonated with every cell in my body. And sometimes when that happens, you just learn to listen. So it was through them actually that they said, you need a species mentor. And then, then it was a question of like scanning the horizon for all the possible species mentors I could identify to see who called me and listening to my body.
So you just kind of went out on your walk with an open heart
Mhm.
and open inner ears to see what was calling out to you?
Well, and what I would suggest to you, Maureen, and to your listeners is that um, we have inherited a culture and a society that leans very heavily on the yang, on the outer, on the doing, right? And on the, you set a goal and then you go do it. Well, I'm practicing. I believe that I am here to serve the balancing of the yin and the yang again. And so part of my practice is it's not like I went out once to find my species mentor. I probably did it over 7 or 10 days until I felt comfortable and secure enough that the one that was calling me kept calling me, you
Okay.
know? But but that's part of strengthening our capacity to receive and to be in the yin, because actually that imbalance I see as part of what's really creating so much harm in the world on every level, from the social to the ecological, you know.
I love all the sense of adventure and putting kind of the puzzle pieces together.
Well, and Maureen, it's part of what I admire about your work and about your upcoming book is that we have been educated to imagine that the human world is the whole deal. And it's just not. And, that science is discovering things all the time about how plants perceive color and how animals relate in far more ways with much more perceptual ability than we had ever imagined. And what I am finding in this time that asks so much of us is that I'm feeling more and more called to relate to the invisible world. And I think that's part of what you do in your practice and in your book. And for me, emotions are another way that I believe, one of my great teachers is a woman named Carla McLaren. And she says, emotions are one of the ways that nature speaks through us, to us, through us, right? And if in fact we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature, then our bodies are carrying wisdom that we can access if we practice and if we listen for it. And so are our emotions, and so are our dreams. There's so many ways.
We tend to second guess these experiences.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I found while writing this book or actually interviewing for this book. I reached out to a number of people who I admired and asked them to participate, and I would take their stories down. Everybody that I reached out to were involved with the natural world in some way. Of course, we all are, but I mean in their profession.
Mhm.
So, so that was kind of a focus on
Mhm.
just people involved with nature. And then some people I got on with, they were like, wow, one story? I have so many. I don't know what to say. I said, oh, the first one that comes to your head, that's the one I'm sure that needs to be shared. And
Exactly.
that was fun, and I think you also had that experience of like, "Okay, this is the one I'm sharing today."
Yeah.
And then some people were like, "Well, what did you want me to talk about?" A profound experience in nature. Hmm. And some people came at it from more of a mental way.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they had an amazing experience, but yet it was their left brain that was giving me all the detail and you know, the actual facts about the event.
Right.
And then it was like, well, what's under that? What did you feel? And it was interesting because sometimes people couldn't go there.
Yeah.
And I wondered, like, how do we access that? How do we help people access that heart when it comes to our experiences?
Hmm. Well, I think we do it through storytelling, actually. Kind of a good segue. You know, in my experience, I mean, here's the thing, Maureen. I have co-shepherded this organization for 35 years now. And what that means is that every year we have a conference. This is Bioneers. And we have a conference with more than 100 speakers, sometimes as many as 200 speakers over the course of 3 days. And all of it's about storytelling. And it is a combination. You know, the people who are speaking are people who have demonstrated some innovative approach to healing our relations with ourselves, each other, and the earth. And so when you hear them, what happens is they begin to fill out a whole picture of how the world could be, because we are bombarded with so much bad news and so much disempowering, false narratives. And the media doesn't cover the good news. They don't tend to cover the solutions and the brilliant innovators. And so, for me, I think, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of Native people say that the biggest distance that we as a species have to traverse in order to make it through this time is the distance between head and heart.
Mm.
And so, for me personally, I would say that part of rebalancing the yang with the yin is about cultivating a sense of awareness about and giving ourselves permission to love what we love and to recognize that what gives us joy has real value. Those are some of the cues and clues that we need to be paying attention to in order to understand what's next in our own paths, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was noticing in some of your exercises, you were emphasizing what lights you up.
Yeah,
What lights you up?
that's right.
And that is magic.
It is. Well, and whether you approach it from a right or left brain perspective, it almost doesn't matter because the things that light you up are regenerative. And we should all be doing work that is regenerative and revitalizing for us. At the end of the day, I want to feel great that I gave my attention and my energy to something I care about so much. And, so what I found is that I have had the privilege of hearing amazing storytellers for 35 years in every domain of human endeavor. And what it's taught me is that really, we human beings are fundamentally social creatures and we're hardwired for story. And once we hear a story that our heart wraps around, we won't let go of it until a better story comes along, one that's more appealing, one that lights us up even more, you know? So I think we have to share the kind of experience that's really in my life been ecstatic of discovering what lights you up and then going for it, whether you think you know how or not, just trusting, right? Because none of us knows how when we first start. And we all
No.
feel like novices and beginners, and we all have tons of programming saying, you're not good enough, you're not learned enough, you're not practiced enough. And we all have to learn to ignore those voices because they're not our friends
Oh,
and they're
yeah,
not true to who we are, you know?
absolutely. In the process of, trying to do this book for a couple of years, finally getting traction, then for 2 years searching for a publisher, the right publisher. I was so like, "My book is fabulous. I've gotta get this out. It's so important." Then I got a publisher. Then I got a due date. Then I'm coming down a few days before the due date, and I'm thinking to myself as I'm reading through part of the book, which was probably not a good idea, "Oh my gosh, this is awful. This is terrible.
Oh,
I need to rewrite this whole thing. No one's gonna like it." And it was just on, and I just went, "Whoa, what happened?" For
yeah.
4 years, I was the biggest champion, and now I'm the biggest detractor, and I literally had to just put that energy away, and I just said, "Okay,
Yeah.
this is enough."
Good
Yeah.
for you. But, you know, I think it's one of the secrets about aging, right? Is that we all have to learn how to assess our own gifts and our loves realistically and own them with some dignity in order to heal ourselves from this horrible culture we've inherited, and at the same time, hold ourselves with humility and real openness, because none of us is all that great. You know, it's a gold of my ear quote that my husband uses all the time. Don't be so humble. You're not that great, you know? And it's like this funny intersection of really, you know, holding our own value and being and having humility at the same time.
Yes, yes. And so important to acknowledge our own talents and gifts because that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And this is when it's needed most,
Yeah.
right now. And I know you write about, Joanna Macy and the Great Turning. I mean, we are in it,
We sure are.
and we need to step up. We
Yeah.
need to take our place.
And, you know, there's just tremendous value in pouring attention into what your heart feels, you know, and what your body feels as well. I think both are places of real wisdom that our society has tended to undervalue. And I think, you know, that's how we invite people into living in a different relationship to the natural world. Because there are stories all over Bioneers and in my book about all the ahas that people have had and the amazing things that people are doing in order to reinvent our society, which honestly, I think almost everything about human civilization is due for a massive reinvention. And we get to be here for it, which is pretty exciting.
Yes, we get to be co-creators in it.
We do.
And I saw you in a summit last month, and well, just like we were talking now, you talked about the power of story to
Mm.
really move people. So that yeah, that really inspired me and is so in line with everything that this book represents and this podcast. So,
Yeah. Well, and it's, you know, as you were saying, it's not just about telling stories, it's about living them as you're telling them. It's about embodying stories, right?
yes.
And inviting people because to some degree or another, we're all empathic. And, you know, the times that I have heard amazing women like Zainab Salbi talk about lying against the earth and hearing the heartbeat of the earth and how it transformed her and caused her to become really a huge advocate for women leading climate justice work all over the world. But, you know, but you could almost feel it when she told the story, you know, or Eve Ensler. I mean, there's so many brilliant storytellers, and I do share some of their stories in the book, but it's, you know, it's magnetic. We can feel other people's joy and other people's ecstasy and other people's learning, and makes us hungry to want some.
Oh, yeah. And I think it also helps trigger remembrances of our own stories,
Yes.
right?
And our ancestors, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a very profound experience last year in the Highlands of Scotland,
Mm.
and I planned on going to Scotland for years, and I finally got there, and every time I entered a sacred stone circle, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna feel the energy, I'm gonna feel," like, just try to feel and get into stillness, and it felt beautiful, it was lovely, but it wasn't an experience,
Mm.
and it was kind of happenstance that we went to this other place, and we were just hiking, and we put our feet in the water, and then a spontaneous
Mm.
eruption of tears just welled up out of me, and I was in the land of my ancestors, and what I guess I wanted to share here is that this was such a profound, moving experience, and even in the middle of writing this book. So this book was top of mind. Having an experience was something I really craved and longed for. I had this amazing experience, but later that day, I think I forgot it.
Wow.
I mean, it just and I went on the business of, okay, now, we have to check into the hotel. Tomorrow we're going on a hike here. We're going to do this. Da, da, da. So my busyness took over. And it wasn't until I was home and I got on the phone, or actually like a Zoom call, with one of my amazing spiritual channeling friends, like you have, right? And
Mhm.
he said, Maureen, something happened to you. You know, there was a place. And I just was like, she just like unlocked that
Wow.
memory.
Yeah.
And so sometimes even our most profound stories have to be remembered. That was a lesson for me.
Yeah. And it's a practice like anything else of learning how to, you know, I used to chafe at the word discipline, but until a teacher of mine renamed it as discipleship. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm down for that. So having a discipleship to your own mind and your attention, because where we put our attention is part of what flourishes in our lives. And it's easy to forget. And it takes practice to remember.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, this has been an amazing time for me. I would love to ask if you have any closing thoughts for our audience and for me.
Mm. Oh, gosh. Well, I actually want to feel into the beauty of what you're offering and inviting, and just say, you know, our mother, the earth, is ringing off the hook. And she wants us and needs us to hear her. And part of your tears may have been just feeling long stored up grief, because unfortunately, we don't have public grief rituals in this country. If we did, I think we could diminish the amount of violence like that. And I think we're all in a state of trauma and grieving over whether we're conscious of it or not, over the losses of biodiversity, over the fear and anxiety of climate change, over the sense of helplessness about what can we do. And so, I think what I want to offer is to say, give yourself permission to feel, because I think it's the very first step. And we all need to be feeling more. And, I sometimes watch sad movies because it will give me permission to cry. And if that works for you, do it. I think we all need to cry probably more than we've expressed. We probably need to express our anger and grief and frustration and fear more than we've expressed. And one of my great teachers, Joanna Macy, talks about this a lot, that really what we don't want is to become apathetic. What we don't want is to become numb and not care. That part of our beauty as a species is our capacity for love. And so invest in your capacity for love, for loving life, for loving this earth, and for letting that guide you on your path. So the other things that I would offer are to say that Bioneers is a treasure trove. You can go visit it at bioneers.org, and you'll find videos and podcasts and all kinds of goodies. And I'm going to be releasing a new newsletter in the coming weeks called Leading from the Feminine. And so as soon as you sign up for one thing, you'll learn about it. And we have an annual conference you want to know about. And I'm also teaching 2 courses, one online and one in person, in October. And I teach both of them with a colleague who's a wonderful Buddhist Zen teacher named Deborah Eden Tull. And both of them are about sacred activism, because for so long, our society has taught us that they're separate. Our relationship to the sacred and how we show up in our lives on the earth. And actually, they're not separate at all. So this is a beautiful experience. The live one will be in North Carolina at a place called the Art of Living Center. And the online one will be on Bioneers Learning, which is our online learning platform. So, and of course, my book is something that I'm finding useful for a lot of people. And it's available in Kindle and an audiobook, and it has these guides for embodied practices and all kinds of ways you can use it. So definitely check it out. It's called Nature, Culture, and the Sacred, and I'm proud and honored to have birthed it.
Oh, yes. No, I love it. I love it. And it is what we really need now, is to have this strong leadership from a feminine perspective.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for all that you do, Nina. You are just so inspiring. It's just so much fun to speak with you, and I'm just so grateful.
And I'm grateful to be in the river with you, Maureen. And I so look forward to your beautiful book being published.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it.
Namaste.
Namaste, friend.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, and most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.